Good afternoon. Welcome to today's session. It's great to see everybody here today. And if you're like me, Miss Rainmaker really made my morning, kind of told me a little bit about myself, but about my kids too. I told her she probably told me too much, so I'm going to go to her website, and I'm sure I'm not the only one going to do that. I'm sure others are going to do the same thing. First of all, let me thank you for attending the hiring and competing for workforce post-COVID session. I'm Grady Hunt, and it's my privilege to serve as the Division 6 member of the Board of Transportation. As the name of the panel suggests, we're here today to discuss the difficulties that all industries have had and been experiencing when it comes to hiring, and some of the creative solutions that have been implemented to combat this issue. If you have not already done so, we recommend that you download our event app now. This will provide you access to the event details, the schedule, and more information about our sponsors, because without our sponsors, really, this would not happen. To access the app, visit your app store and search CVent Events. From there, open it and search for NC Transportation Summit 2023. We ask that you please hold your questions until the end of the session. There will be a poll question during this panel that you can find from the app where you see this session listed. I'd like to introduce the panel's moderator, Ms. Amanda Olive, NCDOT's Human Resources Director. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're very happy to have you with us this afternoon. We have three panels, both from the public and private sector, that represent different areas of where business and transportation intersect. So we're excited to see what they're going to share with us and what they're going to tell us about the things that they've done from a recruitment and retention standpoint, most specifically since post-COVID, where we all are struggling with our workforces and our vacancies. Before we get started, we do have a poll question, as Board Member Hunt mentioned. So we would like to ask you guys, if you haven't done so, to please download the app, the CVent app like he mentioned. If you have done so, please go to our poll question. It asks, what do you feel is the biggest hurdle for recruiting and retaining your workforce? It gives you a couple of different options. There are no wrong answers here. This is strictly like, what do you feel is the biggest hurdle that you guys are facing from your business standpoint? So we're going to talk about that a little bit further into the presentation, and we look forward to seeing what everybody's answers are. First up on our panel, we have Dr. Hillary Nixon. She is the Deputy Executive Director at the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. She's a strong proponent of advancing women in academia, research, and transportation. Dr. Nixon regularly advocates for women's interest in her professional service roles. Please welcome Dr. Hillary Nixon.
Thanks, Amanda. It is just a pleasure to be here. So first of all, how many of you were here for Alicia Rainwater's keynote speech this morning? Okay, great. So I'm pretty certain I could probably close my notes, walk away and say, listen to her recommendations in terms of kind of understanding who you may be recruiting and the different approaches. But I did spend 12 hours and 3 planes to get here yesterday. So I'm going to take this opportunity to expand on a couple of the ideas. You are going to hear some common themes and trends. And as an academic, I'm often told, or at least that's what my students tell me, that they need to hear things 6 times before anything sticks anyway. So, as Amanda mentions, much of my research and expertise focuses on gender equity as it relates to workforce development. So that brings a little bit of a different approach to this conversation. And I'm certainly so honored to be here at the summit today and on this panel with transportation leaders, allies, and advocates who are committed to building our transportation workforce, particularly with an emphasis on diversity. So I'm a bit of a data geek, so I thought I'd start with a quick dive into some labor data on gender in the transportation workforce before turning to the topic of research on retention and recruitment. So women comprise about 50% of total employment in the US. When you look at the transportation sector, and we could kind of look around the room here, the share of women is remarkably low. Women make up about 15% of the overall transportation workforce, although getting that exact number from national data sets is a little bit challenging because of the diverse nature of our industry and the incredible array of occupations within our sector. And as I'm sure you're aware, the percentage of women in different sectors within transportation and different occupations varies tremendously. So just over about 1/3 of people who are working in air transportation are women, yet less than 7% of commercial airline pilots are women. Among those working in construction occupations within transportation, only 3% are women. There's also huge disparities in our industry for women of color when it comes to wages and career growth. Black, Hispanic, Native American women earn less than their white and Asian counterparts when you're controlling for education, occupation, and other factors, all those fancy regression equations you might have remembered from your college days. And women of color are also far less likely to move up the career ladder into senior management and executive positions compared to white women. So clearly, we can do better as an industry. So how do we recruit a more gender diverse workforce, particularly during this incredibly challenging period of recruitment? One place to start is understanding the misconceptions that people have of our industry, and also by knowing what factors resonate with individuals of diverse backgrounds when they're choosing a career. So there was a 2017 study that was commissioned by the Government of Canada that found that there was a really lack of awareness among women about the existence and breadth of transportation careers. They thought it was boring, there were erratic hours, it wasn't a family-friendly sector. So I was at TRB last week, and I spoke to a woman who worked in HR at the Georgia DOT. And she talked about the challenges that she was facing because what she had were incredibly vague position descriptions that have probably been through like 12 levels of approval, many that have been around for a long time. And she's like, these just don't effectively explain to candidates what the work is actually going to involve. What are you going to be doing? What are some of the interesting, innovative, community-engaged, meaningful work that you will be doing in this position? So for the most part, right now, we are in a job seekers market. They can be more discerning in their search. They're looking for a good fit and a position where they can clearly see themselves. How do we as an industry make it easy for applicants to do that? Updating, modernizing position descriptions, updating our recruitment materials so we better reflect the diversity that you are looking to achieve. Recruit where your future workforce is already engaging. Alicia talked about TikTok, YouTube, those kind of places. And then for some positions, how about considering skill sets you're looking for rather than specific degrees? We know that there are very non-traditional students out there, people that enter the workforce from a variety of backgrounds. How can you have a position that will pass through some of those initial screeners that focus on the skills you're looking for rather than do you have a BS in civil engineering, for example? So we know that many transportation organizations, they already look to recruit from minority serving institutions, including HBCUs. But it's not enough to just show up. It's important to understand what motivates those students who are seeking employment. So there's data from Ripple Match, which is an online recruitment platform, and it finds that students from HBCUs rank sense of community and work-life balance as more important than average among all students. So promoting how your organization fits within their expectations, and then it's not just enough to talk the talk and say, yes, we can provide you all these things. You then have to walk the walk. You have to make sure that you are working internally at your organizations, your agencies, your consulting firms, your DOTs to address those issues. Certainly, programs such as quality paid internships, apprenticeships, job shadowing can be effective recruiting tools. And I know we're going to hear some examples about some great programs that are happening from my fellow panelists. And I mentioned earlier that I'm a bit of a data nerd. So I strongly believe in the importance and value of gathering and analyzing data. Yes. It isn't sufficient to simply state that your organization has a goal to increase gender diversity. Goals need to be set and progress measured and reported. And I think we're going to hear more about this topic from John. So having said that, much of the typical employment data we tend to gather is pretty limited. It might give us some insight into the who, but not necessarily the why or the how. And what I mean by that is that we might gather data on gender, racial, ethnic, other demographic characteristics, but we tend to have less insight into job satisfaction, a sense of belonging at work, or other aspects that influence career success and trajectories. So this morning's keynote talked about the importance of regular feedback and connections with employees. It really does matter. So a recent study I did with colleagues at the University of Memphis and the University of South Florida, we surveyed people working in transportation. We found that across all measures related to people's sense of belonging and identity within their organizations, women scored lower than men, while men scored higher in factors linked to career development, advancement, support. Women also were far less likely than men to indicate that they received professional development, were far more likely to indicate that they received professional development and support outside the workplace, so with professional organizations such as WTS and others, rather than through their employer. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on the pandemic, it's in the title of the session, and how it has changed the workforce. COVID-19 has had a profound impact on the workforce. Everything from massive layoffs in parts of our industry, a wave of early retirements and the Great Resignation, as well as a pivot to remote working for many. And there's been a couple of widely distributed reports that look broadly at women in the workforce. One by Deloitte, one by McKinsey & Company. I encourage you to Google them, you will find them. And there's a lot of common findings across these reports. Women report widespread burnout and increased stress levels since the start of the pandemic. Remote, flexible, hybrid working environments can be especially important to women, but key in this arrangement is choice. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. And we still haven't entirely figured out how to navigate this new way of working. And challenges remain to ensure that our workplaces provide the flexibility many employees are looking for, while also needing to ensure that employees feel valued and have equitable opportunities to advance. So to wrap up my part of these opening conversations, I want to emphasize that our industry essentially faces three barriers to increasing gender diversity in the workforce. First, knowledge and awareness. We need to not only raise awareness and knowledge about transportation careers, but also change the conversation. So we're talking about the diversity of career options, the significant contributions of transportation professionals to our communities. We know how vital transportation is to providing accessibility, supporting the local economy, promoting sustainability. We heard all of that talked about this morning. Let's get the word out so that people can see themselves fitting within our industry. It really is, I'm preaching to the choir, but transportation is pretty cool, and we do really meaningful things, and people just don't know about us. So second, how do we do this? Through exposure and experience. Experiential learning is a powerful way to help individuals connect with a potential career. K-12 students, this could involve summer camps, field trips, after-school programs. In California, Caltrans, our DOT, sponsors several summer transportation institutes, and we run one at my center. And we consistently hear the students in this program talk about the fact that they never considered transportation before, but now it's on their radar. So let's keep them engaged. Let's stay with those students from high school all the way into their next stage in their careers. At the post-secondary level and beyond, internships can provide exposure, but also classroom-based project learning opportunities in partnership with industry. I love it as an educator when industry comes to me and say, hey, I have a great idea. Can I come into your classroom? Can we do something together so that your students get hands-on experience? And then, of course, transportation-related student and professional organizations also can provide exposure. So if you're not working with your local chapters of WTS, ASCE, those kind of things, you're missing an opportunity to engage with the next generation of the transportation workforce. And third, identity. The ability to see oneself as belonging and being successful in a particular occupation has a direct correlation not only to enter that industry, but also in terms of retention and advancement. Mentoring and networking strategies can be used to help women connect to careers, see how they will fit in the industry, and then programs such as employee resource groups, mid-career leadership programs can be effective tools focused on retention. So I strongly believe that all genders, all people can find a rewarding, lifelong career in transportation. But we have a ways to go still to make that happen. So I want to leave you with one statistic that Jennifer Homendy, chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, noted in her keynote speech during last week's TRB annual meeting. I don't know how many of you were there. I know that my fellow panelists were all there. But she gave a really powerful speech. 71% of women working in aviation in the US report being sexually harassed at work. 71%. Think about your mothers, your daughters, your sisters, your nieces, your friends who are female. That is an unacceptable statistic. So research indicates that microaggressions, harassment at the workplace is on the rise, with women of color and individuals in the LGBTQ+ community far more likely to experience harassment. I certainly expect better from our industry, and I know that we can do better. So thank you. I look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists and engaging in a robust discussion on this important topic, learning from them, learning from you about how we do a better job to promote workforce diversity.
Thank you, Dr. Nixon. Our next panelist is Jeff Pelton. Jeff is the Director of Human Resources and Safety at the Washington State Department of Transportation. Jeff has led the department in the development of his state transportation agency's current strategic plan that includes 3 goal areas: diversity, equity, and inclusion. He currently serves as the committee member on the National Cooperative Highway Research Project that aims to attract and retain and develop transportation workforce of 2030. Jeff?
Good afternoon, everybody. Nothing like giving a presentation right after lunch. I can tell everybody's really feeling the food, the good food. Again, my name is Jeff Pelton. I'm Director of HR and Safety for Washington State DOT. And just to tell you a little bit about our organization, we're about 7,000 strong. We're kind of similar to North Carolina DOT in the sense that we have Washington State ferries. You guys have probably seen some of our ferry boats on the shows. We have a huge engineering component and a huge maintenance component, of which I spend a lot of time over the last 2 years recruiting and doing outreach to recover from what we're all about to talk about today, which is in large part the pandemic and how that has affected our organizations. Just by a quick show of hands, how many of you, I'm assuming there's a lot of leaders in the room and supervisors, how many of you have recruited for a position in the last 6 months? Holy cow. And keep your hand up if you were unable to fill the position because you couldn't find the talent. That's something right there. It's about half of the group here, okay? So I think it's important to note that we're all in this together. This is a tough challenge. What I'm about to present to you is simply what we did at DOT, and maybe there's some nuggets here for you guys to learn from. But this is something that everything that I'm seeing in the data shows us that we have a talent deficit for a lot of the work that we're doing. Now, before I jump in, I want to talk just a little bit about how important leadership is in this process and the direction that a strategic plan can give you. And you heard some of those spoken so eloquently by Hillary. We have three main goal areas, and that is diversity, equity, inclusion, which applies directly to workforce and our outreach. We have workforce development, which speaks to the people that we would develop in the organization once they get there, and then resiliency. These are very near and dear to our hearts, and they are the filter through which we make every decision, including how we recruit individuals. So the first thing I want to talk about is, we at DOT, we must attract a diverse and inclusive and talented workforce to best serve our state. That means that our workplace needs to focus on competitive employee salaries, flexibility, mobility with the job, engagement, and compensation. You'll note up there in April of 2022, our regulatory entity of Office of Financial Management, our budget entity, in partnership with Siegel, published a salary survey. And according to their report, we are 19% behind market when you looked at all classifications across our state. Now that's significant in and of itself. When you factor in total compensation, which is the inclusion of benefits and other elements, they lag the market by 16.3 across the board. So here we are entering into a market that's incredibly competitive, and my partners here in the private sector, you have a lot more flexibility in this arena, I'm sure, because your salaries don't have to be approved by legislators or some other body. But it gets a little worse when you look at just two major classifications, which are major classifications within our organization at DOT, and that's 25% behind market for our engineering positions and many of our ferries positions. Now, we expect future turnover to occur in these job classes while the pressure of delivery build, and we are not well positioned to replace these vital resources given our market conditions. We are simply not competitive when it comes to salary. Now, in addition to that, our most recent exit survey indicates that 41% of those departing the agency did so for an increased salary ranging from 5% or better. Now again, I'm throwing a lot of data at you because this is important when I get to the part where we talk about the results of what we have happening in the organization. But you can see we're not well aligned to the market. So what do we do to try to offset that? We tried to mitigate our risk and position ourselves well in the market, knowing when we were jumping into this that we were not going to compete with salary. What we could compete with were benefits. What we could compete with was flexible work environment. Now, one of our strategic plan elements within the organization that our secretary has is that 40% of the organization should be remote working at any given time. Now that gives me, as an element of, for those prospective candidates, a lot of flexibility to offer a work environment that's much easier for them to interact in. Now, does that mean a ferry boat worker gets to work from home? Absolutely not. Does that mean the able-bodied seaman can? Heck no. But what we do is we build in where we can flexibility for that individual. So when they have to do training, which is mandatory regulated by the Coast Guard, they can do it from home. So we try to market those things in an environment where we know we're not competitive. Our marketing efforts have continued with local news, what we call King 5, with multiple ads that were televised on who's familiar with the Seahawks? Yeah. So we televised our commercials. We developed several commercials that kind of highlight our culture, our strategic plan elements in and around the times when where people are watching the 12th or, basically the commentators talking about the game itself. We're trying to cast the largest net from an advertising standpoint as we can by utilizing digital media, social media, things such as Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, to get the word out about our jobs. And this is a campaign that's built around a lot of the advertising that's going on within the organization. In addition to that, we've had pretty aggressive outreach efforts. We've completed some market analysis across the country with schools in which we think would appeal to our organization as a whole, and we targeted those states. The ones that you see in dark green are places that we physically traveled to, held job fairs at, and also interacted with them virtually through various means within their different community elements, their engineering programs or whatnot. It's oftentimes we can work with the professors and get time on the calendar to simply talk about the jobs, or maybe have an engineer talk about a project that we're working on that may be relevant to their program. Now, this also includes our maritime elements. So we had 16 events nationwide, hitting several of the maritime academies and also partnering with the U.S. Coast Guard. And you can see that these events we almost always tried to attend them in person, but we saw an equal yield of return when it came to the virtual environment. So I guess what I'm proposing to you is those in-person handshakes, sharing of cards, and meeting with the individual is very important. But with the up-and-coming generation, they're perfectly comfortable in the virtual environment as well. So I would encourage you guys to take advantage of those. Additionally, we've had some aggressive outreach and community events targeting veterans, tribes, and other underserved populations. And that's both within Washington State, Idaho, and Oregon. So we've tried to cast that net more regionally, and this also aligns with our telework philosophy because we don't even question remote work from Idaho or Oregon itself. Now, I know we're not in the show me state, thank you, Missouri, but I like to look at the results of our efforts when it comes to a lot of the things that we've had happen. And what you see here is a fiscal year breakdown of appointments within Washington State DOT. This data includes new hires, promotions, and transfers over the last several fiscal years. And you can see we nearly doubled our appointments between FY 21 and 22, which is pretty remarkable given the fact that we are over 20% behind in market salary. Several of our appointments are promotions, so people who work for us and are interested in staying and taking on larger roles based on our culture and what we currently provide from a workforce development standpoint. What you also see is we've exhausted nearly all of our internal resources for internal promotions. That's where the dark green line meets that lighter green line at FY 22. So what does that mean? That means our external hires are for the first time pacing our internal promotions, which makes that external environment that much more important. I think this tells us we need significant investment in training over the next year. When I pull statistics on our project engineers within our organization, there are several regions that have project engineers with less than 6 months of managerial experience. And they're going to be delivering some of the largest projects that we've seen as a state. So even with salaries below market and in situations, we are still retaining and finding talent. People are attracted once again to our culture and to our mission and what we're trying to achieve as an organization. And I will say that onboarding, training, and mentorships have been a critical part of what we're doing to both attract and retain these critical resources. When you're a transportation engineer 1, for example, or E2, onto the organization, we immediately pair you up in a mentorship program. It's available in each one of our regions, and we found that to be a very good way to orient the people to our culture, as well as to give them someone to work with as they're navigating that first several months within the organization as a whole. I mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this is a really important factor for us, and I heard it spoken to at the larger body today, which is we want to reflect our communities. And you know what? We failed. We failed for a long time in this area. We failed as an agency, and we failed as a transportation entity, and we are hitting this head on. Now, what I've got here is, basically 10% of our workforce for the last several years is our persons of color category. And you can see the jump of 4%, which may not seem like a lot, but I can tell you there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into that 4%. We published a new policy in December of 2020 to try to create recruitment and selection processes that are intrinsically objective and provide a level playing field for all applicants. We also revised this policy was developed to establish a stronger basis for our accountability for the people engaging in that process, i.e. the hiring managers and HR. As I mentioned, we have used mass media and marketing outlets to specifically increase our employer brand awareness using venues such as local and national television broadcasts and streaming platforms representative of a broad range of demographic categories to expose us to an incredibly diverse audience. Since the campaign started in August of 2022, it has been the source of nearly 50% of our web traffic on our job site. Now, I will say that our job site needed a lot of work. When I first started getting involved in this, it was like, go to wsdot.wa.gov/HR/jobs/blah, blah, blah. We went out, we bought our own domain, and we've marketed everything to that domain. And what that does is that helps us on Google searches and other areas. So lastly, once we developed that policy, we also had a formal instructor-led training for hiring managers. And I think this is important. It's a 6-hour course covered over 2 days. And given that it's a really in-depth content to ensure that our most current best practices are understood and properly applied throughout the selection process for our hiring managers. And to date, we've trained almost 300 hiring managers in that process. We've also heavily scrutinized our qualifications for positions. Now, I'll just use a really easy example. How many of you guys have heavy wheel mechanics within your organizations? So for us, we got a job description, to your point, it had a CDL in it. When the position kept failing, we weren't getting anybody in the market. We simply asked the question, well, why is this CDL included? Because it seems like a lot of the people that are applying don't have it. And they said, well, when they're working on the vehicle, sometimes they got to get in the car and drive it themselves, so therefore they need to be CDL certified. So we went around and talked to several of the mechanics, said, when was the last time you drove any of these big vehicles? And I said, almost never. So really question the qualifications of the position in an objective way. I don't think it's really to diminish the requirements of the position, but sometimes we put things in there because we think it's needed, and it's a paperwork exercise. But really ask the question, what is needed? Because what you're putting in there could be a barrier to who you're recruiting and how successful you are in that recruitment process. So like I said, we had a gradual descent from our peak of FY19 and a quick ascend from FY22 to current. This is thanks to a lot of hard work. When I put this presentation together, it was over 3 weeks ago. We've actually achieved our numbers from FY19. So what you see there is a difference of 1%. We've actually covered that with our winter hires. So our recruitment efforts continue to assist in filling this deficit. They're not as quick as we'd like them to be, but I would say within your organization, you should expect your HR office to be quick. That is a very important factor, and when I go through this video, you'll probably highlight that. We are trying to pace ourselves similar to Amazon and others, where our time to fill is in and around 60 days. As we talked about, the Bureau of Labor Statistics indicates there's not enough talent in the market to fill much of the employer needs. And once again, I project by spring, we will be well above our FY19 numbers. What we don't know is what impacts the IIJA will have, but what we do know is we've positioned ourselves well with other means outside of salary to be able to fill these positions. And this just gives you a high clip of what that meant to the maintenance workforce. They did see a good bounce in numbers as a result of the winter hiring process. And when you look at their annual hiring trends, the bulk of the maintenance hiring occurs in the winter. We did surpass our -33 number there with our winter hires. But we still intend to implement our high school to highways and veterans outreach programs to get us over the hump and to be able to sustain us. Now I'd like to show you a quick video. We have several examples within our organization where within the HR office we've centralized our hiring process. Now for you hiring managers, I would say it's sped up our process, but it also requires you to relinquish a little bit of control on your entry-level hiring if you consider this. What we did is for like our entry-level engineering coming from the colleges is we sent HR and subject matter experts out there to recruit them. We brought them all to one recruitment where they told us which region they wanted to apply to. And then HR, in partnership with that subject matter expert for the entire state, interviewed those individuals. We hired over 40, almost 50 entry-level engineers in the last 2 months with that process because we were faster to the market and we were efficient with those individuals. We did that oftentimes in less than 60 days. So this program here speaks to another centralized hiring process, which is our high school to highways program. We heard a lot of outreach for K up to 12 and maybe in some of the middle schools. What we've noticed is that we've got a lot of people retiring out of the highway maintenance classifications constantly, and we'd like to diversify our portfolio of individuals in that category. One of the ways that we can do that is we have a really great CDL training program, and so we're targeting high school kids who they have trades magnet schools that we usually target and work with. We get them interested, we get them to apply, we assess them, and we say, hey, if you come work for us, in a year you'll have your CDL and you'll have a career and a pension. And I'll let one of our candidates to that position speak to that process, hopefully, if this works.
So I heard about this program right out of high school. I knew I always wanted to work for city, county, state at some level, and when I was researching jobs, I actually came across this job on the website. The recruitment process was pretty straightforward. I just went ahead and applied for it, got an interview a couple weeks later, and then a couple weeks after the interview, found out I got the job. A couple months after I got hired, I went to a maintenance academy. I learned how to, operate chainsaws, weed whackers, do irrigation work in ditches. Right now I'm CDL training to get a commercial driver's license and forklift certified. I could run the loader. Basically all the equipment that we run on a day-to-day basis I'm trained and certified on. Something that excited me about working for the state of Washington was 4-day work weeks. We work 4 10s. You can't beat 3 days off a week. And once I got hired, I looked into the benefits and great health care, and you get a pension, and a lot of places don't offer a pension anymore. So I mean, even though I'm younger, I'm already thinking about retirement and putting money aside for it. So I do plan to make it a long-term career. I mean, you never know where life's going to take you, but overall, I love it.
So this video is just an example of some of the marketing we've utilized to support our new centralized processes for some of our major elements. So, with our leadership team and with our communications office and our HR office, we've kind of broken down the big parts of our hiring. We have entry-level engineers. Most of what we do is cycle and promote people within. We got our entry-level port. That's our talent pipeline. We got Washington State Ferries. Once we hire them as an able-bodied seaman, they usually work their way up to captain or in the engine room from an oiler in. We've spent so much time on those entry-level pipelines and really created marketing material and a lot of social media around those parts of the experience for the candidate. In addition, we've also streamlined that recruitment process for those entry level, which I think helps reduce the layers of screening and therefore tends to get more applicants through to an interview that may not have got through in a decentralized way. So we have like 6 regions, and each region has a different PE office, and oftentimes those PEs are doing their own recruitments in partnership with HR. So if you have one engineer coming out of college, now they have to apply to maybe 10 or 12 different positions that we're recruiting for. Instead, we just have one requisition for maybe 50 positions, and then we push the talent out to the specific region or PE office that has the need, which requires a little bit of planning, a lot more coordination, and people giving up on their little nuances of what they like in the recruitment process. Sorry, didn't mean to do that twice. Lastly, I'd just like to speak to our greatest recovery by far, which is within the engineering ranks and technical services group. We've had an incredibly successful backfill process. I will attribute that to a lot of different things. Our diversity, equity, and outreach, our planning, our nationwide planning that brought people to those positions, our streamlining of the processes, and our policy revisions. I think that we're probably going to expand our workforce needs in the coming months as we figure out what exactly we need as a result of the federal package. But I feel like we're well positioned to meet the needs of the organization moving forward, despite some of our salary differences, which we are also working on as an agency. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I appreciate this moment that I get with you to talk about what we did at DOT.
you, Mr. Pelton. We did have 4 panelists, and one unfortunately wasn't able to join us due to them being under the weather. So our final panelist for today is Mr. John Lemon. He is a solutions specialist with SAS. He joined SAS in 2007, and his primary focus since then has been working with federal, state, local government, and commercial customers to understand organizational effectiveness and their performance against stated objectives. That is a mouthful. He uses his past experiences to help customers implement industry-leading performance management and workforce analytics through the integration of technology, processes, people, and methodologies. Please give Mr. Lemon a warm welcome. And also, we had some individuals come in a little late. If you did not download the app and take the poll, please make sure you do, because this is going to be your last chance.
Thanks, Amanda. There was supposed to be slides, but I don't see them up here. I think this gentleman's coming to my rescue right now. Thank you. Imagine a slide. Let's see. What is up? I work in technology. I'm used to this. If it's really that big a deal, I can do it without slides.
Okay, yeah, I don't know what's up.
Windows sign in window. Narrator reads aloud text on the screen.
Oh, that's
Button
good.
Windows off off list automatic.
Okay.
We can just have him do the presentation.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't know what's up with
Yeah,
the,
no big deal.
They won't escape out. Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. So I wanted to spend a few minutes today talking a little bit about how you can use data and analytics to help your recruiting processes. There's been a lot of talk lately on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and those types of things. And it is true. There's a lot of stuff you can do with these things, but you kind of really have to know how you are actually going to go about doing these types of analysis. There was going to be a slide that I was going to show that would break down all the different places that you can inject analytics throughout the employee's life cycle. We organized it into 3 general areas. One is the onboarding and recruiting process, as well as the second area was around retention and when you, grow and nurture an employee. And the third one was around retention and the retirement process. Usually we like to point customers to the retention and the retention and retirement process first, because it's a lot easier to bail out the boat than it is to sometimes plug the boat. In other words, we like to retain good talent as opposed to going out and hiring new talent. There's a lot of different reasons for that. There are some statistics that you can quickly find on the internet with about a 5 or 10 second internet search that show what the cost of turnover is. I think it's the Center for American Progress estimates that it can cost anywhere from 50% to over 200% of a person's salary to go out and attract, recruit, do the actual interview and onboarding process and get that person trained and up to speed. And that is a cost that if you have a lot of turnover, that can quickly turn into one of your major expenses. So if we can keep that type of talent instead of going out and constantly having to recruit talent, then we're much better off for that. And I realize that this session itself is about recruiting, but a lot of the processes that we use to do retention can also be applied to recruiting. Some of the things that we do when we go out there is we look at a lot of different data sources. So one of the first data sources we're going to look at is your HRIT system. And Hillary mentioned a lot of those types of pieces of data that we would get our hands on. So things like age, tenure, things like education. You can get into some of the diversity type of categories like gender or age or ethnicity. And those are all very good sources of data. And you can do some good work with that, but it only gets you so far down the process. We also like to go in and tap into things like time and attendance systems. So we're looking at when people are taking off, how long they're taking off, if they have any types of patterns or reasons why they might be taking off. We can also get into performance systems. So we're understanding, how people are performing on their jobs, what's their overall competencies for their jobs, and things like that. We've also gotten into things like training to understand what types of training people are taking, how often they're taking the training. There's some employees out there that make a career of training but don't seem to kind of do the work sometimes. We can kind of find those types of things in the data. They may be also taking training that really doesn't have much of an effect on their overall job or their overall satisfaction of their job. So we need to know which courses we need to take and which ones are having the biggest impact. So once we pull in all that type of data, we do all the calculations, we run all the algorithms, and at that point we can start understanding a little bit more about why people are potentially coming to work for the particular organization or why they might be leaving the organization. When we talk about why people might be leaving the organization, we can predict when they might be leaving and who might be leaving. When I say who might be leaving, it can be by the individual themselves, or it could be a group of individuals. So think of maybe by location. Certain people on the western side of the state leave more than the eastern side of the state, or it could be by a specific skill set. Maybe transportation workers leave at a higher rate than a divisional director or something like that. Or we can look at it from a bunch of different diversity categories. So Hillary mentioned that there's a lot of there's underrepresentation of women in the transportation industry. I was talking to someone last night who was a woman in industry or in the transportation industry and said that she's also noticing those types of things as well. So we're able to understand what those patterns are, and then once we understand when people might be leaving, then we can start understanding what we can do about that. What are some of the causes of why they might be leaving? Is it because they have a lack of salary? Is it bad communications with their manager? Is it that their schedule's just not where they want it to be? Is it because they're not getting enough training? There's a number of different reasons why people might be leaving an organization. And then once you understand why they might be leaving an organization, you can then start looking at your incentives to understand how you might be able to keep them and retain them a little bit more. And guess what? Once you understand what it takes to keep a person in your organization, you can then advertise those types of things when you're doing recruiting to make sure that you're advertising the things that recruits would want to see. So, for instance, we may have a transportation worker, and we would know that transportation workers at a low level might like to have a lot of training because they're starting out their careers, and maybe they want higher salaries. Those are the two most important things to them. But someone that's actually been in the industry for a couple of decades, maybe works at a division level, they may want more time off or flexible work schedules. Then those are the types of things that motivate them. So then we can go back and start looking at our different types of incentives to try to incentivize people to either, again, stay with the organization or actually come work for the organization during the recruitment process. Because different incentives have different impacts on different people. And when I say that, I usually use an experience from my personal life. My wife at the time worked for the Environmental Protection Agency, and her office was about 17 miles from our home in Washington, D.C., or the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and she had to commute into the city itself. It took her anywhere from an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half to get to work every day because traffic in Washington, D.C., if anyone's been there, you know how bad traffic can be in that town. A couple years ago, she was offered either the incentive of having a $1,000 cash award or the ability to telework from home one day a week. So for her, that was an absolute no-brainer. She's going to take that telework schedule because with those extra 2 or 3 hours a week, she can go to yoga or go shopping or do whatever she wants to do. That's a lot more valuable to her than a $1,000 cash award. But if you were to take someone of her same age, with her same tenure, same gender, same education, same skill set, and same just about everything and pick them up out of urban Washington, D.C. and plop them in the middle of rural Iowa, that person might pick the $1,000 cash award because the commute's really not that big a deal to them. So just by changing one variable, the variable of a person's location can have a drastic difference on which incentives you would want to offer them when trying to, one, either encourage them to stay with the organization through retention or going out to recruit when you're looking for new candidates. So it's really important to understand what those overall impacts are going to be on the person itself that you're trying to recruit. So for instance, if we know that a certain type of worker wants to have a flexible work schedule and has lots of training, but when we're going out to recruit, we're going to talk about all the great training opportunities that they might have, or we're going to talk about the fact that we can have compressed work schedules or flexible work schedules to try to encourage that person to come aboard. So I'm trying so hard to remember what my slides are, and it's so hard to do. So in closing, I just want to say that data is really key to understanding a lot of this analysis. There's a lot of data out there that's going unused right now, and there's a lot of data in places that people don't even traditionally think about using data from. There's things like unstructured data. So, for instance, data you would find in comments of an employee satisfaction survey or an employee exit survey, or maybe you can get into the comments of a performance review. We can mine that data and start understanding what are the types of things that are motivating the employees to, again, stay with the organization or come aboard with the organization. And we can use that to kind of help optimize what our incentive programs are going to be and to advertise those types of incentives when we're going out for recruiting. So I get the point I'm trying to leave you with is please use your data the best you can. And if you need help understanding how to use that data or what types of analytics you can apply, feel free to stop by the booth at SAS, and we'd be more than happy to talk to you about that. But there's a lot of really good stuff you can do using artificial intelligence and machine learning, and it can have a pretty good drastic effect on your overall recruiting efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you did a great job without slides. So, and we apologize for that.
Yeah, no problem.
So again, please make sure that you've done the poll if you guys haven't done it already. And we're going to do some questions for the panel, and then we'll also give you guys an opportunity to ask some questions from the audience. So, so the first question that we have, you guys have all touched on it a little bit, is what can we do to continue our efforts to recruit new talent?
Where do you want to start?
Feel free to.
Anywhere? All right, I'll jump in with a couple of ideas. I am never, I never have a problem speaking up. So I think there's, just like we're doing right here, is sharing and communicating best practices. In fact, Amanda and I sit on a National Cooperative Highway Research Program panel, which is looking comprehensively across state DOTs at practices related to gender equity in the workforce. And there's several of these research projects that are coming down the pipeline so that we can start looking and understanding what are examples, how might I utilize that in my own agency organization. And then I think we have, so many of you, like almost everybody in the room, I swear, put up their hand about the fact that you are in the process of recruiting right now, which means you're bringing in new hires. And I would say don't discount those new employees as a portal to additional potential new employees. And my example here is I mentioned I was just at TRB, and I was talking to a woman. She's a GIS specialist. I think she's at, where is she? Anyway, so she's up at a DOT in the Northeast. I don't remember what state. But she was so excited about what she was actually doing in her job with the DOT. And she's like, I want to bring in more people like me. So as we have openings, I'm reaching out to my classmates and my recent colleagues that I just graduated with, and I'm trying to bring them on board so that they can come and join me so that we can build this new workforce together.
Thanks, Hillary, for those comments. As I reflect on this, it's a really hard question to respond specifically to, but when I think about the hiring managers I've interacted with over the past several years, I think there's probably a couple things that I would say. One is know your audience. We heard a little bit about that today. And when I think she talked something about technology and, it's adapting to new technology doesn't matter unless you've had a previous context. Well, a lot of times what I spend time doing is fighting with hiring managers about our approach. A lot of what we talked, so be open-minded when you're thinking about that target audience that you're looking to tap into. Know where they seek information. I had a hiring manager say, well, I usually take our flyer and put it up on the Safeway bulletin board in Podunk, Washington. And it's like, that's great, but we're not finding people. We need to do high school to highways. That's where we're tapping into really great resources. We're showing that we're keeping them for longer periods of time. And you got to really rethink the whole process. I mean, even the question of job fairs, I know that I put up there, hey, we went to these different states. I really question the yield on those to date. I think virtual environments is where a lot of the market's going. And when I'm talking to Oscar and he's a hiring manager, he says, oh, I'm not finding my structural engineer, or whatever you're looking for, Oscar. I said, well, did you post your job on LinkedIn? How many of you guys have a LinkedIn account, right? Are you taking your jobs and utilizing your network and kind of quote unquote advertising it there? Because sometimes we're spending money individually in places where if we pooled that money together as an organization, it becomes much more efficient. And you can build marketing around that. So you got to bring communications in, you got to bring a marketing component, you got to understand the audience. And then you really have to, once you find them, don't leave talent on the table. That's what I say. So if we interview for one position and you find if you find 3 white hot engineers, I tell my hiring manager, you better come find me so we can figure out how to bring those folks on. Because when the talent is in the market, you better get it. And don't wait. So when when HR sends you your list of your names, move on them. Because I know in our market, if you wait 2 weeks, they're gonzo. If I had a structural engineer position we were looking for, and they waited almost 6 weeks. They came back to me. It's like, oh, it's a failed recruitment. I pop into the system. I'm like, you guys sat on the names for 6 weeks. They all have jobs at HNTB now. And those are things that are really important. You got to time the market. You got to understand it. You got to move quickly. You got to use marketing to your advantage.
Yeah, I would echo what both Hillary and Jeff said. First, Hillary's comment on just understanding what others might be doing. Forums just like this are great to get together with your colleagues, understanding what's working really well for them, their best practices, but also to understand what's not working for them. They may have said, they're putting up the job descriptions on the Safeway bulletin board, and that may sound like a great idea at first, but when you look back at it and it's just not working, you need to understand that what's not working. And you also have to come up with ways to measure those different programs to find out what is working and what's not. And again, being a big geek, you said you were somewhat of a data geek. I'm a huge data geek. But using data to help understand and measure those things is really important. And then also just understanding what are the other types of things you have at your disposal. I mean, before we got together as a panel, we were talking a little bit about some of those programs that are out there. And Jeff, I think you mentioned that you're even going out into colleges and looking at people in their junior years to start offering, or at least getting on their radar screen, and potentially even offer them internships and potentially jobs after they graduate, to get that talent early and to bring it in. It's important to understand what those different types of programs are, and again, how they can be effectively measured.
Thank you. And you hit on this a little bit, so let's kind of segue into this. What are the ways and the areas that have shown to be most effective, and what has also shown to not be effective, like from your opinion and your standpoint?
I would say the marketing and advertising has been most effective for us in really synchronizing campaigns around specific groups of positions. So in other words, in our case, we knew that we needed to hire about 100 new engineers within our organization. So we have, the regional administrator and the assistant regional administrator, we worked with them and said, tell us how many you need in your region. Okay, you need 10. Okay, you need 10. We cobbled all those together. We publish a recruitment that advertises all of those positions at one time, because then the candidate's looking at one recruitment and saying, holy cow, you guys are hiring for 45 positions? I got a shot. I only have to apply to this one position, and I'll have an interview in 2 weeks. And 2 weeks from that point, I'll have an offer. That's a pretty, people in this environment, they want to move quick. And sometimes if you can beat others to the market, you're actually getting it at a cheaper price, I guess, because we're offering less salary. And those are the things that we found that have worked really well. What we haven't found that works so well, I would say, is maybe the spider web of different places where people like to think that they're recruiting to. So I would say pull together those resources and find the most efficient ones. We have a whole laundry list of places where we post our recruitments. Every position goes to those sites, which I think is mostly beneficial. But when 50% of your traffic is coming from one source, that tells you that's much more efficient than a lot of those other places.
Yeah, I would add that just knowing your audience, I think Jeff also mentioned this too, but knowing your audience, if you're recruiting for younger talent, you're probably going to want to get online and put things out there like LinkedIn and those types of things. But that might not work for maybe older talent because they don't necessarily have the LinkedIn accounts or don't necessarily use those type of media outlets. So understanding who you're recruiting to and understanding how to not only get to them, but making sure that you're using the right language to get them to want to work with you, whether that's certain types of incentives, whether that's certain types of schedules that you can work, but understanding what is driving that person's decision to come and get the job, and then making sure that you're putting yourself in a position to actually do that.
Yeah, we've heard a lot of great ideas. The research talks about most of these that we've talked about. I think one other area is related to career advancement, succession planning, kind of letting candidates know how you plan to invest in their professional growth and development. Whether it's career mapping, mentorship, all the other things that we've been talking about. When I entered into the workforce, I don't even think I knew the phrase succession planning and things like that. I was so excited to get a job. I was like, yes, take me. The young adults nowadays are really thinking very differently about their career trajectory, their career growth. And I don't know, it's because I was listening to Alicia, I was like, oh my goodness, all of her conversations about parenting. I have a millennial and a Gen Zer. I was like, oh, I've done all of those things. And I think I've pushed onto them my beliefs, expectations for what they need to be thinking about. My poor son is already thinking about, he's like, do I have enough money put away for retirement? I'm like, well, you're like decades away from retirement, but okay. So I think they come in thinking about these things. What is going to be that pathway? And I thought that video from Washington with that young individual, he's already hearing about, knowing about how the state DOT is investing in his career growth and opportunities and training. So I think that's a really important piece as well.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about data before we open it up to the floor. How much data would you say that you need from a standpoint of for it to be effective? What type of subset of data would be sufficient to get a good gauge of what you're dealing with?
I'll go ahead and take that one.
Yeah, that's all. That's
you
all
and
you
Hillary
do.
can fight for it,
Yeah.
whatever you guys want to do.
It actually doesn't take a whole lot of data. I guess that's a very subjective term. A whole lot, or if it's big data. We work on things outside of HR all the time, like credit card transactions, where there are millions and millions and millions of transactions that come in every day, each second, that we're having to analyze. To us, that's big data. When it comes to data about HR, it's really not very big data at all. In fact, it's kind of small. I mean, if you think about a large organization, just say there's 1 million people in that organization, that's not a whole lot of of data points when you consider what technology can do these days. And then you layer on top of that how often the data changes. It really doesn't change that often. Maybe every 2 weeks, each pay period, you'll see people come in and come off the payroll. You may see people taking training once a month, every couple of weeks, maybe once a quarter. So it really doesn't change that much. So there's, from a size standpoint, it does not take a lot of data. Now, there you can also go out and get data from multiple sources. Again, I was talking earlier about time and attendance performance systems, training systems. There may be third-party data out there that would have things like your average housing in certain areas, or what the median income is in certain areas. So you can also add that type of data, but when it comes to the types of data, there is a lot, but when it comes to the size of that data, there's really not that. When it comes to the type of technology we can use to crunch numbers these days, it's really not a big data source.
Can I just make a quick comment about that? I guess from a practitioner standpoint, I would say you just need enough data to help make better decisions in your process, because we're all trying to improve that. And the example that I would give for us, I think I shared the diversity person of color data. The way that we tackled that was very data centric. We used our applicant tracking system to analyze, people give us their information when they apply to a position and they say, this is what category I am. And we used that data. We knew the problem was we weren't getting people that were persons of color into our position. So we said, let's start at the beginning. So we said, okay, where are we looking for people? And it was at University of Washington in downtown Seattle, and Washington State University, which is in Pullman, and up in Gonzaga in Spokane, all predominantly white schools. So then we started to break down, okay, well, who applied to those positions based on that outreach? Okay, we know the problem. Let's focus on that. And then we started using different data sources. Like, there's a ton of data out there about graduates from different schools. You can go to different places. US World Reports or something like that has all that data. We just tap into it. Okay, now we know Texas A&M has a really high population of Hispanic people that graduates from civil engineering school. Why don't we go there? So we do that. Now we relook at the data again. How many Hispanics did we get? How many persons of color did we get in that category the next year? And we did that across the spectrum. Okay, so we started with people applying, and then we took the problem to the next set, which is how many people were applying to how many people were getting referred over to the hiring manager. Was it an equal number or close to equal? If it wasn't, we were talking to hiring managers. We're going back to our training process, sharing that information. And then we started to look at the hiring process. So we just kept breaking it down. We are as an agency, we're using that data to the point now on retention. Okay, so we've increased our pipeline for DEI. We're getting people that look like our communities. Now we need to make sure that we keep them. And so every stretch along the way, we're using data to inform our process and our decision making, and that's where I would say, it yields the greatest outcome based on your strategic plan.
I don't know that I have too much more to add other than echoing what's been said. One piece about the mention of the universities. I don't know of a single university that doesn't have their institutional data and analytics, it's called different things, different places, publicly available, so that you can drill down and you can look across various different disciplines, majors, programs at the demographics. There, you Google minority serving institutions and you're gonna get a list of so many that you may not even have realized are in your backyard, but drilling down and looking at that data. And then I think there's also an incredible value of, I mentioned you gather the data, you analyze the data, but then also publicly, to the extent that you can, publishing what is it that we're doing? What is our goal? How are we making progress toward our goal? Because as candidates are looking through, they want to know that this is an agency, an organization that cares about bringing in people like me. So.
And you can use that data to challenge the norm too. I mean, we looked at a lot of information, and a lot of my hiring managers were excluding mechanical engineers out of the consideration, even though it was in the job description that said, you can have a civil degree, mechanical, environmental. I would look at their scoring and it was like, okay, civil, they scored 5, mechanical 4, environmental 3. And it's like, you're leaving talent on the table, right? We need to get these people to the hiring process so you can interview them. And I think once we kind of reset that thinking as an organization, it opened up the talent pool for us a little bit more. But that requires some real data-intensive analysis, along with some really critical conversation with hiring managers to kind of challenge that thought process, because they're not used to the new market. They're used to seeing, well, I do a recruitment and I have 5 civil engineers to compete for this role. You might only have 2. You might only have 1, and that's good enough if you're only looking for 1 position.
I think it's also important to go back and update or revisit or review the type of data you're collecting. So for instance, a decade ago, when you went to select what gender you were, you had 2 choices, male or female. It's not like that anymore. You have maybe 3 with not specified, or maybe you have a half a dozen to a dozen different types of categories you can choose from now. So going back to the point I was making earlier of understanding who your candidates are, going back and re-engineering your data that needs to be re-engineered to what those candidates are so you can speak to them more directly is very important. If you can go out and speak specifically to a female of a certain race or ethnicity in their language and tell them the things that they want to hear, or set the expectations of what you can provide them for the future, it's going to give you a lot better chance of recruiting that individual, as opposed to just making a blanket statement that hopes that everybody in the room is going to take the same way, which is just not, it's just not possible anymore.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about the poll question really quickly before we go to the floor for questions from the audience. So our poll question, again, just to give you a reminder, was what do you feel is the biggest hurdle for recruiting and retaining your workforce? Your options were salary, benefits package, alternative work schedule options, or other. It looks like salary did come in at the highest at 43%, which I really don't think surprises anybody. That tends to kind of be a go-to answer when you're looking at recruitment and retention. Interestingly enough, benefits package only got 2%, so it doesn't appear to be something that is a hot topic of consideration with the market at this point in time from what we've all seen from a hiring manager standpoint. Alternative work schedule options was 30%. Also, I don't think that's a really big shock. As we've talked about numerous times through the presentations and the questions, that is definitely something that a lot of people ask about now as they're looking for their next job opportunities, or for a place to come and work, that they're going to have some type of opportunities from that standpoint.
But I bet if you had that same conversation before the pandemic, that would have been a much lower number, because
Right.
everybody was just like, well, I have to go to work 5 days a
Can't
week.
do
There's
it
no
from
other
home. Yeah.
alternative that would work, and that's not the same as it is now. So.
That's an excellent point. And then D, other, was 25%. So just out of curiosity, anyone who picked other, do you mind like just kind of shouting out what other was in your mind, what you were thinking when you picked other? Different. So career path or development options. Anything else that you guys were thinking of when you picked other? Well, apparently you're 25% of the group. So let's open the floor up to some questions from you guys. Can I have one of those mics? Do you mind?
I'm trying to figure out how this thing works.
So if you'll just raise your hand, Tammy will come to you and give you an opportunity to ask your question.
Dr. Nixon, your data, was it compiled from down operator level, like equipment operator level, right on up to upper management VP level, or just what level was it? Because you're talking about an entirely different set of circumstances based on what an operator has to deal with, because like that one about flexible work, there is no flexible work when you're an operator on the job. You're on the job, you're working, or you're not getting paid if you're not on the job. So I was just curious what group your data came from.
Yeah, so some of the first numbers that I was talking about, you know, percentage of women in the workforce and different careers and things like that, most of that is Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and it is aggregated. So you're not, you can dive down into specific occupations, but it's hard to get, other than someone maybe transitioning from an operator position into a managerial position. You'll get that change with the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So you bring up an incredibly important point about how do you slice and dice the data? How are you looking at that information? Again, I was given a pretty aggregate level with Bureau of Labor Statistics information. And then some of the other surveys that we've done, kind of looking at people's sense of belonging, identity, less on the this is my demographic characteristic, but this is how I feel about my experience. That was collated and aggregated as well. We do have the ability to dive down a little bit into specific occupations, but I would caution that for the most part, we tended to see more mid-career managerial individuals responding to that survey.
I would also like to mention too, when you're looking at data, it's important to understand if that data has any bias in it. So, and it's really important to understand how to detect that bias. I think it was you had mentioned that you were only looking at schools that were predominantly white. Well, you're not going to get a lot of diversity if you're only looking at schools that are predominantly white. So there's going to be a bias. I think there's a famous one, I think it was Google or Amazon, one of the techies, I can't remember, where they went out and used their past experience to find what a quote-unquote good employee looked like. Well, they were using it on an industry that was very, very dominated by men at the time. So when they saw things like captain of the field hockey team or was in a sorority or something like that, the algorithm would score those resumes lower than they would if they were, you know, in a fraternity or the captain of the football team, because they were looking for those types of traits. The computer models had been trained with a bias in there. So it's important to to look at the data to see if you have any bias, but then also understanding if you do identify bias, how are you going to go about and eliminate that bias? It's still good data, you just have to look at it differently without getting into too much detail. You just have to look at it in a different way. So I think that's important to understand as well.
Okay.
Thank you. Jeff, question for you, sir, for Washington. For the high school to highways program, you talked about the forklift training, the certification, the CDL with the new ELDT, the equipment operator training, all those portions. Was that done through your HR section, or was that done in one certain area of Washington, or could you replicate that throughout the entire state?
Thank you for your question. So the question was for the maintenance academy that we had, you know, who runs that? It's a partnership between us and the maintenance office. So we handle certain portions of it. They handle the more technical items. They have maintenance trainers that focus on the CDL aspects, and the downing of trees and all that stuff is handled within the program. But what we do is we bring people in from all over the state at the same time in one location. So we partnered with a community college, and they have a pretty large area where we can bring some equipment out there as well. And so we bring everybody that we hire through that cohort, if you will, for that year in, and not just the high school to highways folks, but also entry-level highway maintenance worker, which we consider a 2-level. They all come to the same location, they get the same training. HR does their part, they do the technical aspect, and then we have equipment for them to operate in and around that time frame. And I think it's maybe like a 2-week process. Once they're completed with that, then we kick them back out to their maintenance sheds for them to go out and do the work.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Dr. Nixon, you mentioned that to recruit new talent, one strategy was to use your current employees to recruit from their networks. And I'm just curious, do any of you have an employee referral program?
We piloted one. This is Jeff from DOT. We piloted one in the Northwest region, but I'm going to go back to his bias. What we found in that pilot was a lot of the current workforce was referring, people that look like them, and so we had pretty good success, but we weren't getting the diversity that we were looking for. So we basically, until we have a more diverse population that would be representative of those referrals, we kind of shut it down. But yeah, I think we offered, it was like a $500 whatever finder's fee referral if the person stayed for past their review period, was what we had offered in the pilot. But we chose not to proceed with it statewide.
Thank you. Any other questions? No other questions. Okay. Then I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Hillary, John, Jeff, for great presentations and good conversation. This is important. I'd like to also thank the members of the audience here, our guests. We really appreciate you being here today. As we discussed in this session, we're all looking for new and creative ways to reach and hire new employees. I encourage you to go explore our career fair, which is occurring both today and tomorrow right here in the Convention Center. Also, while you're there, make sure to visit NCDOT's Office of Civil Rights Business Development Zone in the exhibit hall for a great networking opportunity. There will also be more time to network tonight from 5 to 7 in the exhibit hall during a vendor reception sponsored by HNTB. And again, thank them for sponsoring the reception tonight. I'd like to take a minute to thank our partner, NC Go, for hosting the 2023 NC Transportation Summit, as well as our sponsors who helped make this event happen. For those of you who are looking for professional development hours, there will be an email sent to you for that. And we have a break now from now until 3:30, and the next session will be in the ballroom at 3:30. Thank you all.